As April 1945 dawned, the war against Nazi Germany was, in all practical respects, over. Pockets of resistance needed to be mopped up, and the final surge to the outskirts of Berlin still lay ahead. But large-scale German resistance was a thing of the past. The Soviets would take Berlin. The Americans would march in behind them. Victory was only a matter of time. The programs that follow begin with an overview of a world at war and place the surrender of Nazi Germany into the context of both the European and Pacific theaters. Following that are vignettes from the surrender of Germany itself. Not only will you learn about the hunt for saboteurs and how the military assumed civilian control of the towns, but you'll also see the anger of the soldiers as emaciated prisoners of war are liberated from German Stalags, and the horrors of concentration camps are unveiled. The programs that follow are presented without any editorial intervention or contemporary revisionism whatsoever. Not only do they show you what the final days of Nazi Germany were really like, they capture the emotions of the time, something modern documentaries simply cannot recreate. Please note, some scenes are disturbing, and parental discretion is advised.
The immensity of global war, as it occurred at the height of World War II, staggers the imagination. On the ground, in jungles and swamps, in mountains and forests, and on the plains, millions of men scattered around the entire world, locked in combat. In the air, thousands of others with their bombing and fighting aircraft. On the seas and beneath, other thousands with their surface ships and submarines. Incredibly long supply lines with mountains of materiel to transport. Vast communication networks stretching around the earth. It was the greatest concerted organization of military might in the history of the world. It was as if the scriptural concept of the Battle of Armageddon was being realized in its greatest magnitude. In Europe, by the end of September 1944, the United States had 5 great armies battling the Nazis. The 5th Army in Italy, the 1st Army with elements already on German soil, the 9th, the 3rd, and the 7th, all fighting beside British and Free French and other Allied forces. In the Pacific, the 6th Army and other elements. In Burma, General Joseph Stilwell's command of American, British, and Chinese jungle fighters were driving back the Japanese, opening the way for completion of the Lido Road, which our Army engineers were building as a land supply route to the embattled Chinese by way of India. In Russia, German armies were in retreat before massive Soviet counterattacks. To use an old Army expression, we were clobbering the enemy on all fronts. But it was no grand march, no sudden sweep to victory. For as the aggressors were driven back, their resistance increased along with mounting desperation. We paid a price for every mile we took. The battle for Germany was on. For the Germans, their Götterdämmerung, the twilight of the gods, had come.
Our armies were battering at the gates of the Nazi homeland. General Hodge's First Army drove through the vaunted Siegfried Line, mile upon mile of concrete fortifications and anti-tank emplacements, to the city of Aachen. years and 7 months after General MacArthur had left the Philippines, he kept his promise to return. On the 20th of October, 1944, his forces invaded the island of Leyte. This, too, was to be no easy parade to victory. Our soldiers were to face an enemy who would fight as their leaders ordered them to fight, to the death. They wanted it that way. They were to get what they asked for. Seven days after MacArthur landed on Leyte, the United States 3rd and 7th Fleets dealt the Japanese Navy its death blow in the battle for the Leyte Gulf. The curtain was rising on the last fast-moving act of the drama of World War II. General Patton's Third Army took Metz. Ahead was the nearby Saar Basin, Germany's second most important industrial district. On the other side of the world, Army B-29 bombers from new bases on Saipan showered bombs on Tokyo, a fiery rain from the heavens to avenge Pearl Harbor. The campaign on Leyte was going well as our forces moved on, capturing the Japanese base at Ormoc along the west coast. Other forces landed on Mindoro Island with no losses. While General MacArthur's forces were driving forward in the Philippines, Patton's Third Army penetrated the Saar and drove on across the Saar River. A record-breaking fleet of 1,600 United States heavy bombers blasted Frankfurt and other German cities. The Nazis were reaping a bitter and devastating harvest from the seeds they had once sown from the air. Now the very perpetrators of aerial blitzkrieg saw their own cities reduced to rubble. To the millions of Nazi war victims, here at last was a measure of retribution against their merciless executioners. Ground, some of the bitterest fighting of the war took place on the Cologne Plain. Our push toward the industrial roar was resisted every step of the way. Then, on the 16th of December, 1944, the German counteroffensive struck. German Field Marshal von Rundstedt suddenly sent a dozen elite divisions smashing into the Ardennes sector. von Rundstedt had cast the dice for high stakes, crossing the Meuse River, driving toward Liège, and trying to cut the Allied communication lines from Antwerp to the front lines. If our lines of communication could be cut, the fate of our armies might be in the balance. This was the Battle of the Bulge. Combat and non-combat troops were suddenly and necessarily fighting side by side in worsening winter weather. Grabbing their weapons, they dug in and responded to the old military axiom of hanging on to buy time until reinforcements would come. General Eisenhower took immediate action to meet the crisis. He put the 1st and 9th Armies north of the Bulge under command of Field Marshal Montgomery's 21st Army Group, with orders to attack from the north. Patton's 3rd Army was to attack from the south. Two airborne divisions were rushed in. The 101st was ordered to hold the vital communication center at Bastogne. It was during this action in besieged Bastogne that General MacArthur, who was then commanding the 101st, made his famous reply to the German demand that he surrender. That reply was reportedly one word long: nuts. If the enemy did not immediately understand the meaning of MacArthur's typical American reply, the action which followed undoubtedly convinced him that it meant that the Americans had no intention of surrendering. Just 6 days after von Rundstedt had launched his counteroffensive, elements of Patton's 3rd Army, racing up from the south, struck the German on his southern flank. The pressure was off the 101st Airborne. The 1st American Army attacked from the north. After the British struck the Bulge on the west, the 3rd Army smashed on north to link up with the 1st Army. Then the weather cleared, and our planes took to the air, blasting von Rundstedt's forces. The Battle of the Bulge was soon over. The enemy was retreating. The Germans had thrown their last big Sunday punch of the war. While the Battle of the Bulge was going on in Europe, the 8th Army, commanded by General Robert L. Eichelberger, was battling stiff Japanese resistance on Leyte in the Pacific. The fight for Leyte would continue for months, until nearly 50,000 fanatical Japanese would be annihilated. our forces were spreading out in the Philippines. 6th Army troops landed on Luzon in the Lingayen Gulf and swept southward to capture Tarlac, only 65 miles from Manila. "15 days later, men of the 1st Cavalry Division fought their way into Manila. The capture of Manila included the Santo Tomas prison camp. Along with the Filipino people, these prisoners had waited in long and quiet agony for this moment of liberation. Of all the liberated peoples in the world, none showed more gratitude than did the Filipinos. They well knew we had come not for conquest, but to keep a solemn promise to return and destroy the aggressor, who had taken over their homeland in a war of conquest. Less than 2 years later, the Philippines would be given complete independence as a sovereign nation by the United States. "13 days after the fall of Manila, our airborne troops landed on Corregidor. 2 years and 9 months after the Japanese had hauled down our flag. It had been a long and bloody road, but we had returned. Who and where were those who once had said the American was no soldier, that he would not fight? Around the world, climactic events were swiftly gaining momentum. Our 9th Army, under General Simpson, crossed the Rhine on the 2nd of March. 4 days later, General Hodge's 1st Army occupied Cologne. 4 days after that, 300 of our superfortresses blasted Tokyo. By the 17th of the same month, General Patton's 3rd Army had taken Koblenz. The next day, and half a world away, our troops invaded Panay Island in the central Philippines. 3 days after that, Patton's 3rd Army crossed the Rhine. 4 days later, General Eichelberger's 8th Army was landing on Cebu in the Philippines. Less than a week after that, on the 1st of April, 1945, the United States 10th Army, under General Simon Buckner, invaded Okinawa. On the 11th of the same month, the 2nd Armored Division of the 9th Army reached the Elbe, only 63 miles from Berlin. The 3rd captured Coburg. On the 12th of April, death took the Commander-in-Chief, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He had lived to see the triumphant advances of American arms, but fate had denied him the satisfaction that final victory would bring. Less than a month after President Roosevelt's death, Germany surrendered. Hitler was dead by his own hand. Only a few days before, Mussolini had been killed by Italian partisans. To his home shores, General Eisenhower returned in triumph. But in the Pacific, a war was still going on. A big and bitterly fought war, with the end not yet in sight. Okinawa was a bloody battleground, as our 10th Army was finding out. It took us 82 days of continuous fighting to take Okinawa. Kamikaze attacks on our Navy took a heavy toll, but we fought back, never letting up. All the military might of the United States would now be concentrated on the Japanese homeland. A tough job lay ahead, a job that would take men and equipment. Our entire military strength was now aimed at the one remaining Axis partner. Our military planners estimated that in an all-out assault upon Japan itself, our invasion forces would probably suffer 1.5 million casualties. But a new and terrifying force had come into the world, which was to prevent those 1.5 million casualties, the atomic bomb. 2 of these awesome weapons dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki brought Japan to her knees. On the 2nd of September, 1945, Japanese officials signed the Articles of Formal Surrender on the battleship Missouri in Tokyo Bay.
The formal surrender by the Japanese on the 2nd of September, 1945, marked the end of the shooting in World War II. It was a momentous, historic event. But there was one other that followed, which might not have been as historic to the world at large, but it was probably the most rewarding moment in the life of a fine old soldier. General Jonathan Wainwright, who had been forced to surrender Corregidor, had been rescued by U.S. Army paratroopers from a prisoner of war camp in Manchuria. and flown back to be present at the formal surrender on the battleship Missouri. A day or two after that, he was present at the surrender of General Yamashita and the remnants of the Japanese army in the Philippines. It must have been a great day for Jonathan Mayhew Skinny Wainwright, West Point, class of 1906, American soldier.
Additional films inside Berlin. Photographed on 9th May, just as the unconditional surrender terms were being ratified in the German capital, the scene showed the emptiness and desolation of this once largest city on the continent. The Reichstag is bomb-scarred. Hardly a landmark escaped being hit during the Allied air attacks. The Sports Palace, scene of many Nazi rallies. Only the outer frames of buildings remain upright. Bomb blasts dumped floors into cellars and blew off the roofs of the structures. The Tiergarten Victory Column. About 2 million of the pre-war population of 4.5 million are now in the Berlin area. The French port of Saint-Nazaire. The German garrison in this resistance pocket surrendered 11th May, ending 5 years of occupation. In 1942, British commandos staged a daring raid on Saint-Nazaire. Dragon's Teeth adjoin the submarine pens. In a statement on the condition of surrendered ports, Supreme Headquarters lists Saint-Nazaire as partially blocked but usable for coastal vessels. Inspection reveals extensive U-boat installations, but only one sub is found in relatively good condition. At IJmuiden, Holland, German minesweepers and other craft are used for shipping Nazi units from the Netherlands. On 25th May, the surrendered troops march aboard for the trip home under Royal Navy escort. All are searched for food and pilfered articles. While the evacuation via the North Sea is in progress, other Nazi elements follow the land route back to Germany. Canadian Provo units relieve the German soldiers of all items not listed as standard issue. The great causeway of the Zuider Zee is choked with men and horse-drawn vehicles beginning the trek eastward out of liberated Holland. At Flensburg, just below the Danish border, the Allies formally dissolved the acting German government headed by Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz. Numerous officers of the German High Command and the interim administration are arrested as prisoners of war on 23rd May. Among the more prominent Nazis seized under the Supreme Headquarters Directive are Admiral Dönitz, Colonel General Gustav Jodl, and Albert Speer, Minister of Economics and Production. Dönitz has been described as the self-styled successor to Hitler. Jodl was appointed chief of the German High Command last April. Speer coordinated industry with Wehrmacht requirements. Admiral von Friedeborg commits suicide by poison immediately after dissolution of the Dönitz government. The same day at Lüneburg, Germany, Heinrich Himmler also ends his life by taking poison. British troops captured the SS chief while trying to escape, wearing a disguise and carrying false papers. Himmler died by crushing and swallowing the contents of a small vial of poison which he had concealed in his mouth. The capital city of Oslo from the air following capitulation of the German forces that occupied Norway since June 1940. On 14th May, a British military party headed by Air Commodore Darrall arrives to accept the surrender of Nazi ground forces under Colonel Kaza. An interpreter announces that the German commander is ready to meet the British. Colonel Kaza steps forward and makes an attempt at a friendly meeting with Commodore Darrall. The capitulation proceeds with speed and formality. German garrison units, comprising approximately 250,000 troops, have been withdrawn from all cities and towns in Norway and moved to concentration points to await return to Germany. Cheering Norwegians greet the arrival of the British official party. A parade through the streets of Oslo marks the event. King Haakon and his government will return to Norway. In an Oslo court, Vidkun Quisling appears before Judge Gunnar Gulbrandsen at a preliminary hearing where he is charged with treason. The Nazi puppet premier of Norway and 6 of his cabinet members surrendered 9th May. On the 26th, he listens to the accusations brought by the Norwegian people. After the first proceedings, Quisling is returned to jail to await trial in a special court within the next 3 months. Nazi concentration camp at Holzen, Germany. It's one of 7 found in this area by the 83rd Division 9th Army during the drive to the Elbe. Some of the prisoners photographed on 8th April are badly beaten, others diseased and emaciated. Of the 350 at the camp, 140 are Jews, 210 are Russians, Poles, and Czechs. 75% were imprisoned for alleged acts of sabotage. Lice and other vermin infest the camp. The Nazis confined the prisoners to a diet of potatoes. Stalag number 326 near Paderborn. Russian prisoners of war riot for food after liberation by elements of the 2nd Armored Division, 9th Army. Starved by the Nazis, they storm the food stores of the prison camp, and our troops are unable to restrain them. An apparently abundant stock of baking flour is one of the chief objectives of the hungry men. On 2nd April, a total of 10,000 Russians are freed at this main camp for enlisted men. In addition to starving these prisoners, it's reported that the Nazi guards committed repeated acts of physical violence. The Russians devour every edible they can lay their hands on. Once the men have eaten, the American troops have no trouble restoring order at the camp. These liberated Russians are told to remain in the camp and stay off the roads until a juncture with the Red Army makes repatriation possible. In Hadamar, Germany, a war crimes investigation team arrives at a Nazi institution seized by 1st Army troops. Under the guise of an insane asylum, this has been the headquarters for the systematic murder of 35,000 Poles, Russians, and Germans sent here mainly for political and religious reasons. First to appear before Majors Fulton Bowell and Hermann Bolker is Adolf Merkel, records clerk for the Hadamar Institution. He gives testimony confirming the murder of Poles and Russians. Next to appear are Dr. Wallmann, head of the institution, and Karl Willig, chief male nurse, who admits to killing inmates with overdoses of morphine. The testimony of other witnesses substantiates the fact that morphine was issued at the institution without attempt at making a record. As many as 17 at a time died from the morphine injections. The investigating officers are told that the Nazis never bothered to determine whether a victim may have survived the overdosage. Instead, all were hustled off to the graveyard and buried in piles of 20 to 24. The prisoners are removed to await trial. Meanwhile, at the graveyard attached to the institution, bodies are exhumed for autopsy. The remaining civilian population of Schweinfurt, Germany is assembled to be screened by men of the Counterintelligence Corps, who are alert against saboteurs and other dangerous elements. As part of G2, the Counterintelligence Corps operates in conjunction with AMG, which already has confiscated all arms and radio equipment within the city. Civilians over 60 years of age are separated from the others. If they pass the CIC screening, they'll be permitted to return to their homes. Schweinfurt was first entered on 11th April by the 42nd Infantry Division, 7th Army. A salt mine at Merkers, Germany, is revealed as the hiding place for a Nazi hoard of gold bullion, currency, jewels, and other forms of wealth. Officers of the American Third Army make an inventory of the treasures which had been removed from Berlin to the Merkers depository. The almost 200 tons of gold is reported to be virtually the entire remaining bullion reserve of the Reichsbank. A ton of fine gold represents about $1 million. The Merkers hiding place was uncovered by our troops early in April. Suitcases contain a variety of valuables. It's discovered that the Reichsbank had been buying gold wedding rings, gold teeth, and other loot taken by the Nazis from their innumerable civilian victims. Valuable works of art are included in the treasure hoard. Approximately 400 rare paintings are found. Removing the Merkers salt mine hoard takes 24 hours. More than 60 trucks are required to transport it to a central point for storage, pending an Allied decision as to its disposition. Looting in Nordhausen. The 3rd Armored Division, which seized the town on 11th April, rapidly continued its advance, and before AMG could take over, the population of Nordhausen had gotten out of control. The civilians include liberated Poles, Russians, and Italians, as well as the local Germans. However, the looters are cut off before they can get away with their booty. Almost all are reluctant to surrender the pilfered articles, but quickly respond to armed persuasion. In time, complete order is restored in Nordhausen. Ninth Army troops free a prisoner of war camp for French officers at Soest, Germany, 35 miles southeast of Münster. Jubilant Frenchmen greet their liberators. The ranking American and French officers see the colors of both nations hoisted over the camp. "4,500 French officers were imprisoned for nearly 5 years at Oflag No. 6 in Soest. They knew of the approach of the American Liberation Forces. A radio set had been smuggled into the camp, and the Frenchmen listened to daily news broadcasts despite the severe penalties for such offenses. Part of the prisoner bag resulting from the encirclement of the Ruhr. Germans captured in the pocket total upwards of 300,000. As large numbers of corps and division commanders surrendered with their men along the entire Western Front, the take of prisoners in April averaged 70,000 daily. Seven German generals gave up in one phase of the Ruhr capitulations. Boys in Nazi uniform, some as young as 12, are among the captives. They attended flak batteries and served as ammunition handlers. Members of the Nazi equivalent of the WWII. A shirtless former Czech soldier aids G2 in ferreting out Gestapo and SS men. He has a concentration camp number tattooed on his arm. The Nazi army at its peak strength numbered at least 8 million men. Almost 3 million gave up to the Allies in a 3-day period preceding Germany's unconditional surrender on 7th May. The formal surrender of the 512th Royal Tiger Tank Battalion, which marked the end of German resistance in the Ruhr pocket. Vehicles and men are in the custody of the 394th Regiment, 99th Infantry Division. With heads bowed, crews of the vaunted Royal Tiger stand before their American captors. The entry of Allied armor into Bologna, 21st April. Fall of this Po River bastion marks one final phase of the operations leading to collapse of Nazi forces in Italy. Bologna had a peacetime population of 246,000. The troops sharing in its capture are the 5th Army's 34th and 91st Divisions, the 8th Army's Polish 2nd Corps, and the Italian Legnano Group. In Bologna's Plaza Manuel of General Mark W. Clark and ranking officers of his 15th Army Group Command. General Clark described this victory as the beginning of the end in Italy. On Sunday, 29th April, the cessation of hostilities is arranged under the unconditional surrender signed by 2 German officers in civilian clothes. The United States, Britain, and Russia are represented, headed by Lieutenant General W.D. Morgan, Marshal Alexander's Chief of Staff. The terms call for the immediate immobilization and disarmament of the enemy's ground, sea, and air forces in northern Italy and parts of Austria. The German Lieutenant Colonel signs on behalf of Colonel General Heinrich von Fietinghoff-Scheel, Nazi Commander-in-Chief. The event takes place in the former summer palace of the Neapolitan kings in Caserta. The German major signs for Obergruppenführer Karl Wolff, elite guard commander and general plenipotentiary of the German army in Italy. On behalf of the Supreme Allied Commander in the Mediterranean, General Morgan next places his name on the Articles of Surrender. An estimated 1 million German troops are involved in the capitulation. By the terms of the instrument of surrender, the war for Italy ends at noon, 2nd May, 5 days before VE Day.
I have the proud privilege of speaking for a victorious army of almost 5 million fighting men. They and the women who have so ably assisted them constitute the Allied expeditionary forces that have liberated Western Europe. They have captured or destroyed enemy armies totaling more than their own strength. They have pushed triumphantly forward over the hundreds of miles, separating Cherbourg from Lübeck, Munich, and Leipzig. In the very beginning of the war, the United States and Great Britain decided to combine themselves into a true partnership for the attainment of their common purposes. They took as their first objective the crushing of the European Axis. This task they undertook first because only here was it then possible for 3 great powers, Russia, Great Britain, and the United States, to combine against one of their widely separated enemies. Merely to name my principal subordinates in the Canadian, French, American, and British forces is to present a picture of the utmost in efficiency, skill, loyalty, and devotion to duty. The United Nations will gratefully remember Tedder, Montgomery, Spaatz, Bradley, DeLotte, Creer, and many others. But all these agree with me in the selection of the truly heroic figure of this war. He is G.I. Joe and his counterpart in the air, the Navy, and the merchant marine of every one of the United Nations. He has braved the dangers of U-boat infested seas. He has surmounted charges into desperately defended beaches. He has fought his tedious, patient way through the ultimate in fortified zones. He has endured cold, hunger, fatigue. His companion has been danger. Death has dogged his footsteps. He and his platoon commanders have given us an example of loyalty, devotion to duty, and indomitable courage that will live in our hearts as long as we admire those qualities in men.